Get through all that. If you want to join me tonight, Proverbs 25. We're in Proverbs 25 tonight. Proverbs 25. Proverbs 25. Now, we've been working our way through for about the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, the book of Proverbs. We're right there, kind of within striking distance of the end. But I want to cover a few details here that we really haven't gotten into yet in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs covers a lot of stuff. You know, it's relationships, money, how to live your life, all of this stuff. There's a whole ton of Proverbs that repeat themselves over and over. But I want you to note these ones right here because especially as we go into election season, it's really fun. You're like, this one's applicable. But I want you to notice this because look at Proverbs chapter 25, and I want you to notice verse 1 to notice, just in case you forgot who these are the Proverbs of. All right, these are the Proverbs of Solomon. All right, and we all understand a few things about Solomon. All right, so Solomon's a king. Solomon's one of the wisest men who's ever lived. Again, he exemplified this idea that wisdom doesn't necessarily mean you're living the right life because he didn't always live the wisdom that he taught. All right, but he's got a lot of wisdom to him. And so I want you to notice this as we walk our way through this. And look what happens. Just real quick, is my microphone really hot? I'm hearing myself, so I want to make sure I'm not deafening you. Okay, all right, good. So I just wanted to make sure I don't have to tone back my volume because you know how I get. All right, but look at Proverbs 25, verse 1, and look what it says. It says, "These are also the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out." Okay, really interesting. We don't have time to get into all the details here, but this is after the time of Solomon. There were apparently a bunch more Proverbs that had not been compiled, and so you got these guys under Hezekiah who were like, we found more. And I don't know fully how all this works. You know, we talk about inspiration and preservation, and there seems to be some of this, like, we're collecting this wisdom and putting it all together. And so what happens here is this collection of Proverbs is something that you have a king who's copying down the information about another king to then pass down to us. So I want to lay that groundwork because what you've got right off the bat is you've got a ruler who's trying to tell you how to deal with rulers. All right? And so you've got a king here who's saying, there's some information that you, as not a king, need to understand about how to deal with kings. Written by a king, recorded by another king. So it's got kind of two stamps of approval here. But I want you to see what this has to say. Because the next several Proverbs all have to do with how do you deal with your leadership? How do you deal specifically with a king or someone who's in authority? Now, I deal with a lot of people, and love him or hate him, it's really funny to see how people respond to a guy like Elon Musk. You know, it's really funny. So, you know, obviously we all know who Elon Musk is, okay? Multi-billionaire. He's founded or taken over or run multiple companies that deal with all sorts of different industries. But there's people who will sit behind their keyboard on the internet and talk about how big of an idiot he is and how they could totally do a better job than he did. Really funny to see people do that because I just kind of want to look at them and go, okay, so what's stopping you from becoming a multi-billionaire? If it's so easy and it's so simple to do, go ahead. Just show me how to run your house. Much less 7 businesses at the same time. Like again, love him or hate him. Like you can absolutely hate everything about Elon Musk, but you got to admit the guy knows something about running a business because he's made a lot of money through doing it. Now, you could be like, well, I mean, he had the secret starter fluid that started it, but it's like plenty of other people have too, and they've completely failed to run a business. So there's something that he knows. There's something that he's wise about. He knows how to do it. Again, love him or hate him. You don't run a business involving rocket ships and technology and information and digging random tunnels under cities because that fits with everything. He knows something. You also have to look at certain political leaders and love them or hate them. You have to say, love them or hate them, agree with them or disagree with them. They at least know something about what they're doing. And again, you could look at both sides of the aisle. Democrats, Republicans, whatever the in-between is, you can look at these guys and say, they know something about how to play the game. We wouldn't call it godliness, but there's a wisdom to some of the things they know how to do. And again, it's really easy to sit there and be like, I could do it better. And it's like, so why don't you? That's the premise that we get into here in this passage. Because there's all sorts of people who are going to sit on the sidelines and they're going to hurl stones at a ruler and say, I could do it better. I'm smarter. I'm more talented. I'm more skilled. And yet, you look at the way they live their life and you look at how they carry themselves and you go, so why aren't you up there? I remember I talked to a high schooler one time. And I was there, I was serving at his church, and I was helping him with a youth group activity. And again, this is a high schooler. He had next to no money. And it was really funny to me because as we finished our conversation and our interactions, he's like, hey, you know what, I'm going to get into some financial management stuff with my life. So, hey, if you want any advice on financial management, just let me know. I'll just tell you, I don't know where he is now. Maybe he is just absolutely rolling in it. But I think you all understand why I didn't jump at the opportunity for someone who doesn't know how to manage money to manage my money. He didn't have the chops, as it were. He had the motivation. He had the chutzpah. You could be like, yeah, that's good, man. Like, way to sell yourself. But I have not seen any fruit of what you've produced. I'm a little nervous, and I'm going to hold on to my money. And I want you to see that because look at Proverbs 25. Because with this in mind, Solomon is saying, I've learned a few things by ruling. I've learned a few things in my tenure in office, as it were. And I want to kind of put your mind at ease, and I want to set your mind straight on a few things. And so look what he does here. Proverbs 25, verse 1. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, the king of Judah, copied out. So a king is copying down the words of another king telling you how to deal with kings. Verse 2, it is glory of God to conceal a thing, but it is the honor of kings to search out a matter. The heaven for height, the earth for depth, so the heart of the king is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and there shall come forth a vessel for the finer. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne shall be established in righteousness. Put not forth thyself in the presence of a king, and stand not in the place of great men, for it is better that it be said unto thee, come up hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of a prince of whom thine eyes have seen. Okay, so this first 7 verses all have to do with this idea of how do we deal with leadership? How do we deal with rulers? How do we deal with kings? How do we deal with authority figures? And so really, if you want to kind of break it down into 3 different categories, the first one is understanding the mind of a ruler. Okay? So if you look at verses 2 and 3, it's this idea of understanding the mind of a leader, of a ruler in some way. Now, by no means is this saying we just blanket accept everything that a ruler does. Okay? There are plenty of examples in Scripture of godly men who stand up against wicked rulers. Okay? I can think of one off the top of my head, John the Baptist. John the Baptist looks at Herod and goes, what? It is not lawful to do what you just did. Now, he then had to face the consequences of that decision, and we all understand what the consequences of that decision were. However, you've got men like John who will stand up and say, your actions are evil and unlawful, and I'm going to call you out on the basis of Scripture. You've got other guys, Nathan. Nathan goes to David under prophecy, but he knew what was going on, and Nathan comes, tells this whole story to the king. The king gets all upset, and then he goes, you're the man. And he didn't mean that like, you're the man. He meant, you're the one who just did that. He confronted a ruler. And so throughout Scripture, you've got godly men who are not afraid to confront rulers. So that's not what this verse is saying. But I want you to notice what it's doing. First off, it's saying when you understand the mind of a ruler, understand that it is actually the glory of a ruler to search things out. It is the glory of a ruler to pursue after what God has hidden. Okay? Look where it says here. It is glory of God to conceal a thing, but it is the honor of kings to search out a matter. So, step number one is understanding the mind of a ruler. It is actually a glory for the ruler to figure things out. It is a glory for a ruler to lead. It is a glory for a ruler to do a little bit of work and to figure out what God has set in order. Okay? Now, you guys know I come from a background of a lot of weird program activities and a lot of escape rooms and a lot of other things. So what I did is I went around my office, because of course I have all this stuff just sitting in my office, and I collected some of my favorite puzzles. Okay? I come from program work, which meant my job for a long time was concealing stuff so that other people could figure it out. And on the side of the person who's doing the concealing, it is half the job of just saying, I'm going to hide this stuff in plain sight and see if you're smart enough to figure it out. When you figure it out, I get glory because they go, that was clever what you just hid there. When they figure it out, they get glory because they figured it out. That's what this is saying. God gets glory when he conceals something. You notice God could very obviously declare everything and just open it up. But God comes along, and you think about like DNA. God hides molecular machines inside the body and goes, good luck finding that in about 4,000 years when you have the technology to catch up with me. And then we look at that technology once we get technology and we go, that's amazing. Look at that. Look at the detail there. Look at those little machines that are self-replicating and doing all this work. This is crazy. And what we do is we then glorify God for it, but the person who discovers it gets glory because they figured it out. There's parts in the eye that mimic fiber optics. All right? And so you've got these cables that transmit light. We did not understand how the eye really worked until we developed the same level of technology. And then we start noticing, that's what that thing is. And so you'll have people with a straight face who will look and say, I could design the eye better. And it's like, yeah, sure you could. But they'll do that. But they'll be like, look, there's all this blood vessel stuff like right in front of that sensor that's supposed to pick up the light. Again, we step back and we go, how would you do it differently? Because you need the blood vessels right there to nourish that sensory array. And you go, but that means you're going to have to send the light through the blood vessels. And it's goes, I don't know about you, but I look around and I don't see everything in a red hue. It means God figured it out. God knew how to get the light through those blood vessels, and he does it with the equivalent of fiber optics. The light hits these things, and it beams it straight to the signal receiving section of your eyeball. We did not understand that until we came up with a similar level of technology. And so what's really neat, again, coming from the various fields that I've come from, I love figuring out puzzles. And I remember one time I found this book. All right, and this book was an old like video game case for like a collector's edition, and I found it and I was like, this is kind of neat. You know, it opens up, and one of the reasons I knew this wasn't just this is because I was like, there's no way they made this whole book for just this little slot. There's just no way. And so I started looking around this thing going, there's got to be a secret compartment. Like, for one, it's a collector's edition, which means there's hidden stuff in here. Like, I didn't buy just the game with a fancy box. What on earth? And so I started looking around, because again, I found it. So I didn't know, like, I didn't have any of the paperwork that went with it. I didn't have any of the secrets. So I started looking this thing around, and I'm like, it's just this. Well, again, what's really cool is there's a hidden compartment hidden on the bottom that folds down, and there's a wonderful little drawer with a bunch of other stuff hidden in the bottom of the box. Now, the person who threw it out, I don't think they knew that was there, which I was very happy of. All right? But again, it was just random things. And what is this? The person who designed the box made it with a secret compartment. And we look at them and we go, that's really cool. Like, I'm glad you engineered it that way. I'm glad you figured that out. That's cool. And so one of the things I want us to understand is we bring glory to God by figuring stuff out. We bring glory to God by following after him and figuring out what he laid down for us. I got a friend who wrote a comic book series. And one of the things he did is he made a collectible box that went along with one of his comics. And so it came with a little secret note, and it was basically it's called a Caesar cipher. And a Caesar cipher is basically you have letters, and you just arrange the letters across the top, and then you can basically figure out the secret code by arranging these letters in the right order. And so his little piece of paper has a bunch of gibberish on it, but if you align the things just right, you can figure out what his secret message is all about. Now again, a Caesar cipher is probably one of the simplest ciphers you'll ever run into. It's probably one of the first ones most kids invent when they're playing around in elementary school. And they're like, I'm going to swap all the A's for B's and all the B's for C's. And then now my name is And it's just a single substitution cipher. But it's really cool when you figure it out. And so again, it's a little puzzle box with all these wonderful little ways to solve it. Again, there's another one that you can do, and I simply look at something like this. Just looks like a normal bead bracelet. But again, I've talked about a black light periodically, and one of the great things you can do is if you shine the black light on certain things, it'll make them glow. And again, all of these are things that God has hidden in plain sight. And he goes, you're not even going to be able to detect it until you have the right capabilities. And one of the things that we see here in this verse is it says, God gets glory by hiding things. God gets glory by not making everything that obvious. You get to see puzzles. You get to see stuff hidden in plain sight. It is glory of a king to do the hard work and to figure out the secrets. One of the ones I did for summer camp one year, forgive me, it was the theme of Ecclesiastes, but we were doing a journal. And what we did is we wrote the entire secrets of the week in a journal that we gave to the campers on the first night. And they could read through this journal, and they could start figuring out the secrets of how to play each of the games, how to earn secret points, places where secrets were hidden. There was even a little note in here about this guy who was going to show up and ask him for a verse and to see whether they had built a bow. And some people really diligently studied, really did the hard work and figured it out. And then they would show up during the award ceremony with a bow and a verse memorized. And people were like, how did you know? How did you know that was supposed to happen? It's because they read the book. They studied it out. They knew that there were secrets there, and they started working their way through. And what was really fun is we were doing a pool game, and it was like phase 1, and people are like, phase 1? What do you mean phase 1? Well, in the journal, there was something that talked about phase 1 and exactly what you had to collect during phase 1. And I remember people going, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe you were given a book that told you what to do. And there were times where there were cabins who lost their book. I'm like, good luck figuring out the rest of the week, man. There were other weeks where they just poured over this thing. And it would be it would be like rest and reflect time. And they're like, there's a secret coming up. It was fun for me because I got to hide everything in plain sight. It was fun for them because they got to figure out all the secrets. And what I want us to understand is it is the job of a ruler to do the digging. It is the job of a ruler, and it's actually honorable for the ruler to do the digging and figure out what God has set in order. It is not honorable for a ruler to be lazy. It's not honorable for a ruler to just sit back and be like, oh, someone else can do the work for me. No, it is honorable for that ruler to go out and do the hard work and figure things out and basically think God's thoughts after him. Just as it's honorable for God to create a sequence of puzzles that we have to figure out. And again, you look at biology, you look at all these other things, we are figuring out more and more about how God works. And so I want us to understand that as we go forward, the first thing is it says, it is glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. So we approach this with the job of a king is to figure stuff out. That's his job, and it's his glory, and it's his honor. Go figure stuff out. But I want you to notice the next verse here. Look at verse 3. It says, the heaven for height and the earth for depth, so the king's heart is unsearchable. Now, this is weird, and I know, again, we live in an era that we don't like kings. We don't like, despots. We don't like tyrants. All of those words had a meaning back throughout history, but they've all taken on a negative connotation in our culture and in our world. We do not like people who have the ultimate authority to tell us what to do. But we have to face the fact that throughout most of Earth's history, people have been ruled by someone who, for various reasons, had the ultimate authority to tell us what to do. That's what a king was. The king was a man who was, by definition, a despot. He could do whatever he wanted to do. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing. If you had a king who was a good, just, loving man who was actually looking out for the cares of his people, that was a good thing. That's what Ecclesiastes says, is blessed are you, O land, when your king is the son of princes. But then you've got bad rulers. And as Ecclesiastes would say, is you've got this ruler who eats in the morning. And it's a weird phrase that we don't understand, because what would happen back then is morning was the time for the king to go out and do his work. It was time for him to sit in judgment and to hear court cases and all of that. And it said, listen, if you're a king and you're having a party at the same time you're supposed to be going and doing your actual job, you're a bad ruler and your land's going to suffer because of it. And that's what Ecclesiastes is trying to get across. Again, written by Solomon, he's saying, I know a thing or two about the party lifestyle, and if you've got a ruler who's more concerned with the party lifestyle than doing the right thing, you've got a miserable land. Okay? And we can all attest to that. We've all seen those political leaders who put their own desires and their own concerns first, and you go, that's pretty miserable to be under those people. But look what happens here, though, is he's reminding us that despite whatever we think about a ruler, there's going to be things that that ruler knows that we do not know. Okay? Think about it. If you run a business, are there aspects of your business that you are going to understand far more than the rank and file worker who's under you? Okay? Again, I managed businesses before. I've done other things like that. There are things that I had in my head. I knew how things worked, and it's really fun to have someone come in who doesn't have all that information and try to tell me what to do. You know, I've talked about the ropes course, where I'm like, I'm telling you exactly where this thing goes. And they come in and go, no, I know better. And it's like, dude, it's my ropes course. I know a little thing or two about how this runs. Same thing happens. Like, I built escape rooms and then had people question me on it. And it's like, I built it, man. I like, these hands put that wire there. I'm telling you what it does. I'm not so sure about that. And so, again, if you've run a business or you've led a crew, you understand this. But look what Proverbs is saying. It says, the heaven for height. So there's going to be things that are like way, way above your pay grade. The earth for depth, which means there's going to be things that you know as a leader that are way, way deeper than just the normal person's knowledge. Heaven for height, the earth for depth. Okay? And he uses those two comparisons on purpose, because think about how he talks about God. As the heavens are higher than the earth, what? So God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. He uses almost that same language to describe the mind of a ruler. Now again, I know in our culture, we get itchy in the back of our head at that. We're like, no. But remember, I used Elon Musk at the beginning on purpose, because love him or hate him, the dude knows a thing or two about what he's doing. And you at least have to admit he knows a thing or two about, let's say, running a business. Now, whether it was hostile takeover or whether it was he just built it from the ground up, I don't care. He knows a thing or two about what he's doing. That's kind of this idea with a ruler. It says, as heaven is higher, like way up there, and as the earth is really, really deep, so the heart of a king is unsearchable. Okay, this is why when you get to Romans, it tells us we are to pray for our rulers. Because there are going to be aspects of rulership that require decisions that other people will not understand. I mean, think about it. If you've run a business, there may be times where you have to fire someone. And that person does not typically take it too well when you have to fire them. But it might be for the good of the business. It might be because, hey, the economy took a downturn and nothing against you, we just got to get rid of you. It might be you just cannot do this thing called listen, and so therefore you cannot do this thing called work here. But again, there are times where you don't share all that information with the person. You just say, I'm sorry, it's been great knowing you, it's now time for you to leave. But imagine you're a ruler and you're having to make those decisions on a daily basis. And sometimes you just got to make a choice. And there really are no right answers. You just got to make the best choice you can. That's one of the things Solomon, if you study out Solomon's life, one of the things he did right off the bat when he inherited the kingdom is he goes, I'm a child and I have no idea what I'm doing. That's his attitude. It was a humble attitude. And so what did he do? He immediately ran to God and said, I have no idea what I'm doing. Will you give me the wisdom to rule your people? And he did everything he could to get God's attention. And when he got God's attention, God said, what do you want? And he goes, I just want to know how to rule your people because I have no idea what I'm doing. And so God goes, good question. Good heart attitude. And it goes back to that idea that it is glory of kings to search out a matter. Now you look, before Solomon got that wisdom, he was acting wisely. He was figuring stuff out, but God gave him an extra dose. And so look at Solomon, because what he did is he goes, I don't know what I'm doing. God gives him wisdom. And then Solomon just starts making decisions. Now, how many of us would figure out some of the stuff Solomon figured out? Think about do you guys remember the first test Solomon had in his rulership? I'll give you a hint. It involved a baby and a sword, all right? None of us want that decision, all right? But remember that story? Solomon is minding his own business, and you've got two women who are women of ill repute who walk up and they're like, we're both claiming ownership of this baby. I don't know. I don't know how to figure out whose baby it is. I mean, you both kind of look alike. The baby kind of looks like both of you because it's a baby. What do you talk like? What do I do in this situation? And they're both accusing the other of having killed their own baby, and you're like, I have no idea. And what does Solomon do? He does I can't believe this one ends up in children's storybooks. I remember it as a kid showing up in one of the children's storybooks. It's like Solomon holding the baby by a heel, and he's got a sword in one hand. I'm like, just hits different. That's a hardcore story. All right, but what does he do? He just makes a choice. He just says, all right, cut the baby in half. And you both want the baby, you can both have half a baby. That's a terrible statement. What are you doing? But what was it? He understood a little bit about human nature. He understood a little bit of the behind the scenes and the wisdom that was involved, because he realized the woman who stole a baby probably doesn't really care. And the woman whose baby it really is probably would rather see the baby alive than anything else. And so what does he do? He says, cut the baby in half, give half to each parent. Was he really advocating for him? No. But what happened? The mother goes, she can have it. I'd rather see my baby alive than cut in half, because I don't want half my baby. I want all my baby, and I want her to raise all my baby. And with that one simple motion, he figured out who the real mom was. Again, terrifying story. It's like you hear that and you go, what was that all about? But again, Solomon had a wisdom. He had a knowledge of human nature. He knew some things. And what this verse is doing is it's saying, just as there are aspects where in your official capacity as a ruler, you might have to make some decisions. And someone who doesn't have all the facts, they might judge you for it. They might go, I wouldn't have done that. And it goes, well, if you had all the information, you might have. I love this definition of God's will. The definition of God's will I heard one time was, God's will is what you would do if you had all the information. I kind of like that one. Because think about what God does in this world. He is acting, and he has no blind spots. He has no biases. He has nothing that's going to trip him up. God is simply making the best choice all the time because he has all the information at his disposal. And why are we called repeatedly to trust God's decisions? Because he knows it all. But how many times do we question what God has done? Again, if we go back to the previous verse where it is glory of God to conceal a thing, and it is honor for kings to dig it out. If you were talking to the Creator, you think you'd listen. And I've used the illustration before of when I ran the escape rooms. And there were times where quite literally it was a room I built. And I'd be telling them how to solve the puzzle that I built and put in place and wired and checked just earlier that morning, so I knew it still worked. And I would still have people doubting my decision. I mean, it's one of those things that it's like the arrogance of, do you understand? You are talking to the Creator. The arrogance of, you're questioning my expertise when that belongs to me. But how often do we do that in this world? Where we step in and we go, God, I would do it differently. I don't like how you decided that one. And what God is doing is he's trying to use a king as a picture of his knowledge. So God's kind of up with perfect knowledge. We never question God. Or if we're questioning, it's more just help us understand, but ultimately we're going to obey. And above that, you've got, below that, you've got the king. And the king is this ruler who's ruling in God's stead, and God says, I set him up. I want you to obey him. I want you to listen to him, but I want you to understand there's going to be information he has that you don't have. So if you can't obey a king, what makes me think you're going to obey me? It's kind of like children. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is... Why? Because children having to obey their parents is a picture of every other authority structure all the way up to God, because if you can't trust the parents in your own household, you're not going to trust any authority going up, and you're definitely not going to trust God. So you see how every little pocket of authority that works its way up is just the same picture, just slightly less clear. And that's what God's trying to get us to do, is he says, there's going to be information you don't have, so trust them. Now, if you do have information and you have to call out a sin, or that's why he says to children, obey your parents what? In the Lord. Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. Even pastors or leaders, it says, hey, if they sin, rebuke them before all on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. That's what we covered last week. So no authority figure is to be accepted just carte blanche and they never get questioned. But it's the idea of you understand there's information they have access to that you don't have. And so it's a glory to search it out. It's a glory to do the deep digging. But at the end of the day, you trust. All right? Now look where it goes next. It says, it is glory of God to conceal a thing. It is honor of kings to search out a matter. The heaven for height, the earth for depth, so the heart of the king is unsearchable. And then this is where our job comes in, because look what it says. Take away the dross from the silver, and there shall come forth a vessel for the finer. Okay, I didn't have a silver coin handy, so I couldn't bring it. But think about a silver coin. Think about the purity and the glory that comes from a silver coin in all of its purity. Okay? I have a non-silver coin that conveniently is sitting in the bottom of this box. But if I had a non-silver coin, we understand I'm not tremendously impressed with a non-silver coin. It's tarnished, it's not pretty, I don't really automatically think there's any value to it. But if I had a gold coin here, if I had a silver coin here, there's a beauty that comes with a pure silver or gold coin that our eyes are naturally drawn to it. And you look at what happens because we look at that and we go, okay, if I'm supposed to trust my ruler, and if I'm supposed to do the hard digging, then what do I do when it comes to a bad ruler? Or what do I do when it comes to a foolish ruler? Because not all rulers are good. So what do I do? And look what it says. You take away the dross. You take away the dross, and just as you take away those impurities, it creates a coin that is nice and pure and silver. He says, if you take away the wicked people from before the king, then you're going to help have a godly king. Think about Daniel. I know there's a lot of times where our temptation is to flee a wicked state or to have nothing to do with a wicked ruler. But what if our attitude was better, I'm going to actually work for the wicked ruler to influence him in a godly way? Because Proverbs talks about that. It says when all of the decisions of a king are wicked, it basically means all of his servants are wicked. Because no one's speaking truth into his life. No one's speaking the truth. And you'll notice what happened with Nebuchadnezzar and some of these other rulers. They had guys like Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. And what were those guys doing? They were speaking into Nebuchadnezzar's life, standing up against his wickedness. He tried to have them removed. But they were this godly example, like almost perpetually, like this little thorn in his side that kept popping up. Now, he still made wicked decisions. He still ruled wickedly. But you'll notice it was that continual salt that just kept being there. And it actually ultimately made some really, really good changes. Like Nebuchadnezzar may have become a believer because of the influence of Daniel in his life. And so I want you to see this because look what it says. It says if you take away the dross from a silver, you're going to get a coin that's actually worth looking at. And just as that's the case, you work to remove wicked people from before rulers so they can hear a godly example. You remove the wicked from before the king, and his throne shall be established. How? In righteousness. Now again, does this always turn out well for the guy who is that godly counselor? No. Sometimes he ends up like John the Baptist, who stands up against a ruler, says you're doing wickedly, and that ruler offs with his head. But it's not our job to figure out the results. Our job is to stand up for what's right. And so I want us to see that. So again, as we kind of wrap this up, there's a little bit more we could cover, but we'll do that next week, Lord willing. So we see that God conceals stuff. God doesn't give us all the answers, and part of that is so we trust him, and so we search it out, and we glorify him once we figured it out. We then see that there's a level of trust we have to have for rulers. We don't have all the information. We don't have every detail on the ground, so we are trusting. But we are also working to be that godly example in the life of rulers so that we can be there. Let me leave you with one other example. You can study this one out on your own. Look at the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, and if you read just chapter 1 of Nehemiah, he is a perfect example of this. Because here's a man who's a cupbearer of the king, which means he has a level of trust because you're drinking the potential poison that these guys are trying to slip into the king's drink. All right, so you got to really trust the guy who might take a poison hit for you. But Nehemiah just lived godly in exile. He just lived a good example to the point that when he started behaving a little strangely because he was really sad one day, the king noticed and said, hey, what's going on? And the whole story of Nehemiah kickstarts because of that relationship between a man and his king. And you'll see that with Daniel. You'll see that with so many other people. And so again, I would challenge you, pray for our leaders. Pray for the authority. You stand up and you speak to the sin that they do. But there are going to be decisions that just at the end of the day, we don't fully understand. And that's why we pray, God, put good people around these men. God, put good counselors around these men. Stop the wicked from speaking into the ear of this man. And you pray, and you let God take care of the rest. All right? Now, I want to open it up for questions or comments. There's a lot more we could say about that, but we have gone a little bit long tonight. Well, not quite yet, but almost. All right? Questions or comments tonight? What if I don't want to, Rich? Oh, it's right there. Look at that. Evan with the mic. All right, any questions or comments tonight? I'm going to laugh if there are none because you came all the way out here for nothing. All right.